Mhm. Right. This is the 16th Academia Bessarion, and I'm now actually using a great deal more of reality as well as literature, which I see literature as in the realm of dreams and reality as what you actually, your body feels, smells, sees, hears, and so forth, and so on. And we're going to be talking today about the Roma. In its title is From Graves to Cradles, and I'm now trying to make it advance. Yes, and the interweaving of literature with reality. And I feel it's important to say that the authors of this talk are not just myself, but many others, a whole chorus of voices. Hedera Churaru, Daniel Claudio Dumitrescu, Vandana Kulea, Diamante Danila, Yonel Danila, and so forth. This is what the cemetery was like before the Roma came. Was put to weed killer because this was considered to be cost effective, but which caused a great deal of erosion and damage to the bases in Pietra Serena of the tombs and so forth. And this is what the Roma were able to do, planting the Florentine lily, which holds the soil so much better. We don't get floods of mud in our library any longer, and it's perfumed and it's beautiful, and it has become very profitable as a result of this. So it's not cost it is cost effective. And I want to say how the Roma I see as being citizens of the world. I know in my family there's a story that my mother ran away to be with the gypsies, and my son was born in Burlingame near San Francisco in a hospital where the gypsy prince was also there. And the gypsy mother actually gave birth, natural childbirth, in the lobby to her baby. And my doctors were talking about this in shock while they were delivering mine. And I was rather envious of her. And then I met on the web Chesko from China. He was gypsy who came to America, became a Carthusian hermit, and then left and married and was a wonderful contemplative. The Roma came by way of Rajasthan through Persia and Turkey to the Balkans and to Romania, which is part of the Byzantine Empire, the Black Sea, Constanza, and Cardinal Bessarion's Trebizond. So I think it's fair to also include the Roma in our Academia Bessarion. But their story is one of oppression, of slavery, of Porajmas. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, because the gypsies are also in England. In her, Aurora Leigh has two heroines, one based on Margaret Fuller and the other on herself. And the one who is herself is Gypsy, Marion Earl, who is raped and bears a child out of wedlock and is a lot of connections with our problems, with our families today. The Roma are very right brained. Most of them are illiterate but highly intelligent. They see the whole and all of the details at once. And they constantly amaze me by how intelligent they are in contrast to myself, where I bumble about. So we're also talking about orality and scribalism. In Romani culture, Romani pen is the value of the family, of honor, of decency, of goodness. Marime is what is evil and what is polluting, and they see us, the Gaji, as Marime. It's rather like Jews and Gentiles, Goyim, and so forth. We have the myth that they are dirty. In reality, they are extremely clean, using concepts from India of not touching the bottom part of the body with the same cloth that you touch the top, and so on and so forth. Running water, not a bathtub, and so on. We have a myth that gypsies steal babies, but in reality, we're going to find we steal theirs. And the trafficking of Roma children. This is a book I've just written in 70 pages. And this talk will be mainly on its context chapter, the first one, but with some references to chapter 5 on the laws which are violated and the bibliography. And the preface, well, we can mention that when you go to an Italian court, there is a sign, La legge è uguale per tutti, the law is equal for everyone. I don't find it so when I go to court to defend a Roma. The Italian constitution says that the poverty of the parents is not grounds for taking their children from them, but we will find that Roma parents are terrified because they know that social assistance does take their children. The European Union says that the family is above the state, and then the United Nations with the rights of the child, which initially were formulated by Fioretta Mazzei, the noble Florentine, who was my friend in her last months of life, and after whom I've named this library. And chapter 1, the context from graves to cradles, Arianello Association, the dreadful camp outside of Florence Poderaccio, which then Fondazione Micolucci was able to make better, but then it was all destroyed with bulldozers. And also, we founded a sister association for our own because we find it's extremely important to have us be equal to everyone. And so, Daniel Claudio Dumitrescu is the president of Associația Agrustic Somnacuni in LDR. The title is in both Romani and Romanian. And then in 2008, because I couldn't believe the stories I was hearing, I went to check. Yes, I found 12 people to one room with no windows and so forth. The poverty is extreme, it's real. Osmanoro's camp, which was for the Romanians, while Podoraccio had been for the Yugoslavian Muslim refugees. Osmanoro was for the Christian Romanian who received no help whatsoever. And their camp was bulldozed on the coldest day of winter, 15th of January in 2010, at the birth of Diamanta's second baby. Diamanta and Ionel are members of the Arianello Association and participants in the alphabet schooling since 2010. And then in 2011, I was invited to speak at the European Union's Economic and Social Committee in Brussels on the Roma. And now we receive funding from the Progetto Agata Smeralda to help us help the mothers stay with their babies with library schools in Romania instead of having to separate themselves to come here to beg to send the money home to the grandmothers. Because if they begged with the children in their arms, they would be imprisoned and the children taken from them. This is my first Roma baby. And I participate in the Mass for the Poor in Dante's Badia, a Mass founded by Florence's Sicilian mayor, Giorgio Lapierre, and continued by Fioretta Mazzei. And it was at the Badia in 2001 that I first met Hedera Giuraro. I made a cradle for her third child, little Leonardo, whom I baptized. I got into trouble with the courier and they told me never to do this again. And they said they would do no paperwork, but that it was a valid baptism, but not a legal one. And I made the cradle and then I made many more because my husband had forbidden me to have a cradle. These were used for centuries. You had them by your bed and you gently tap them when the baby started to fuss in the night. So the parents were able to sleep much more than can modern parents who struggle to keep their babies in a separate room and believe it's correct for him to howl his lungs out, which also actually damages his brain. And I paint on the cradles this design from the Casino of the Cardinal Bessarion in Rome with the wonderful Fibonacci curves of pomegranates. And Hedera, her lullaby to her baby, which she sang very beautifully, was Alleluia. And Rayuno recorded it and used it on Easter Sunday. And Hedera one day started to tell a story. She's illiterate. And the story was he was so poor. He was born in a stable with the animals, with the horses. And the people were hungry, and he fed them bread and fish and potatoes. And then the envious killed him. And I said, Hedra, where did you learn the Bible? And she said, well, when our people are old and they can't work anymore, they tell stories to us. And it was her grandmother who was able to read the Bible and who would cry when she read it. And I share with the Roma here Dante's Commedia and find that they are present in novels. This idea also of Afro Americans, the ending of slavery was brought about by novels. This paradox of literature versus reality can in turn become reality. And this is Violetta Mazze saying that an illiterate can have wisdom, and it's not only schools that give culture. This is Hedra's family, and here we see her depressed. She doesn't yet have a house, and then we will be able to help her buy her house. And here she has her cradle in Romania that I've made here in Florence. And this is Leonardo, whom I baptized, and that was an absolute joy that night. And this is the house that we bought for them. And in the cortile, in the courtyard, they had bantam hens, which I saw when I visited them. And then there was another Roma baby, Doina Lepodat. I saw her begging. She still had her hospital bracelet on her arm. And she was crying because she didn't have the money to go to the faraway hospital where they were keeping her baby. And she hadn't been able to nurse him. And he was going to be put up for adoption. So we got young lawyers to help us, and we went to court. We taught the parents how to write their names, and they wrote them beautifully in the courtroom. Everyone held their breath as they did so, and the judge awarded them after 4 months of this baby being in the hospital. And here he is with no expression, a little institutionalized baby. And here he is back home in Buzău in Romania, absolutely gorgeous, beautifully clean, and this wonderful use of fabrics. There is a wonderful sense of beauty amongst the Roma. And here's another family we helped get their baby to safety, the husband and the wife and their child. And we did this for so many families. And then one year, 2007, Vandana Kulea, her mother Amanda, her sister Maria, and their cousin Marcella asked if they could garden in the cemetery. And they began this project of getting rid of the veleno, the weed killer, and instead planting it. And my friend Karen Graffio had already taken these photographs. This photograph here is of Osmanoro, the Romanian Roma, and here are the Romanian Roma admiring this photograph. And here, a young artist and another are doing portraits of them outdoors because no one would accept them being inside the studios. And I asked if I could see where they were living in Osmanora, and they showed me they had built 5 rooms. And this was better than what I saw they had in Buzău, where they were 12, with only one room with no windows. Here they are in the fresh air. There's 7 of them, 2 of them married couples. They keep the water and so forth. They keep everything clean, but it is just out of what everyone else throws away. And the following year, Vandana brought her husband. And in that summer, he conserved all of the Victorian ironwork in the cemetery. And she, you can see, is pregnant. And she will give birth to their baby the day after they finish making their cradle. And little Gabrielle is born prematurely because the carabinieri forced her into their car and she was terrified of the Gaji and went into labor. And what I found fascinating was that um, you can see the pictures. Yes. What I found fascinating was that Daniel would come in the later, 4 o'clock in the morning. He would be in the kitchen warming the milk for this baby because the doctor didn't allow Vandana to breastfeed. And the following year, 2009, was a disaster. Vandana brought her husband, Daniel Claudia Dumitrescu, and her sister, Maria, who then gave birth to a child. But the stonemason for the 2 cemeteries had founded a fascist political party, and I was not allowed to let the family work. But they had to pay €300 to the people smuggler to get their passports back. So Daniel terraced the part of the cemetery's hill that was collapsing, stabilizing it, and I paid him for it illegally, and they were able to return home. They had already bought land in Buzal for building a house for their family, which we got to see the next year. And this is the land that they have bought. And this is Maria, who just gave birth to a baby the day before. And this is the design that Daniel did on my library table for the house that he built. Unfortunately, the rich people who owned the land before communism won a court case, and that house had to be destroyed with no compensation. And Daniel and Bandana had to buy more land and build a second house. And before they could do that, social assistants took all 4 of their daughters from them, including the 6-month-old baby, still at the breast, and they were only allowed to see them once a week. Karen Graffio, she's wonderful. She's descended from people who are in James' ages now. Let us praise famous men. Here again, we see how books and reality, literature and reality intermingle. And she decided to make a chuppah for a Jewish wedding and brought the white silk and we laid it out on the library table. And I used Celt from the type font on my computer, it's beautiful Irish lettering, for the names of the family's ancestors. And these were embroidered by Muslim Roma men as well as women from Kosovo. And when she told the bride about this, the bride said, "Well, I guess that's world peace." And here we see more of Karen Graffio's wonderful photographs, the baby and the cradle. This is Podoraccio, and the family is half Romanian and half Yugoslavian. And this is a photograph she took of a Roma family living in a rubbish dump in Cluj in Romania. But look here, how well organized it is. All the clean clothes and the water for washing and the pans for cooking, the beautiful tablecloth and the flowers and the caring for the baby. The Roma do care for their babies beautifully and they're very precious to them, which makes taking them from them is extremely cruel. Daniel and Vandana created a dictionary for us in 4 languages, Romani, Romanian, Italian, and English, with his drawings. And that's his drawing of the church in Buzău. And here's Amanda, the grandmother, helping build their house, which will later be destroyed. And this is part of the book that they created, Gajo, Baba, Uomo, man, and so forth, the members of the family, and then the parts of the body, and then the clothes and the tools, and so forth. And this is the statuto of the association to protect Romanian families and the Romani language, of which Daniel is president. And here he is, with his grandfather's copper making tools. His grandfather was the top coppersmith in their part of Romania. And I had him make these linen crosses, which copy those in the Bodleian Library. And then he was allowed to work. The top restorer from the Opificio della Pietra remembered the excellence of his work on iron, and Viscount Gough wanted his ancestress's tomb restored. It's very dirty here and it's beautiful here. A piece is gone here and Daniel has replaced it. And that was his apprenticeship. And from then on, he just went on to restore tomb after tomb after tomb in the cemetery. And this is the tomb that Franco Zeffirelli used in tea with Mussolini. And this is the side before it's been cleaned and the side after it has been cleaned. It's not really Elizabeth Browning's tomb. Zeffirelli was making a pretend. And this is the tomb of Edward Porteous, who was a participant against Napoleon. And it was all in pieces. And I love the way the Roma collaborate. They read each other's minds and they understand exactly how to do difficult work, manual work together. I would have them sign their names in our membership book of the Arianello, along with the noble English descendants and the international scholars. And this is Giorgi Petrarche. This is his wife and the children. And this baby, unfortunately, will later die. The infant mortality is very high, and the life expectancy is horribly low. Many of the men die around 40. And this is Nicolai Ferraru, and this is Margarita, who later will be able to write her name beautifully. And she's the one who planted all of the irises. We saw the dreadful house before, and then with his work, Giorgio Petrarchi was able to rebuild it. I'm afraid this telefonino has cracks, so the photograph doesn't look very good. But you can see how clean the people are, even if the surroundings are dreadful. And this is Margarita, who was living here in Florence, in Osmanoro, in this shack. This she paid €50 to get it made. But she is the one who's responsible for this sheer beauty of the irises. And then on 2010, with the Ruspa, the bulldozer, the shacks were destroyed and there was not alternative housing really given to them. Diamanta, because she had a 9-day-old baby, they did offer her a roof if she would separate herself from her husband. Her husband was only 17, but he'd held her hand during the whole cesarean operation, and she would not accept being separated from him. So we found housing for them in Ostello, and also the documents for them to be able to take the baby safely home. And this is neonato, the reference to her child. And the families then, 40 of them, came and lived under this arcade of the Ospedale degli Innocenti for 8 years. I kept going to the Comune, the Cardinal, to Caritas, to Monte Domini, begging for help for them to get housing, and no one would. Finally, Mihai, Yonel's brother, found a factory outside of an abandoned factory outside of Florence, and they were able and now live there with a library school with books and shelves and so forth, and a teacher who is teaching them. But the authorities did nothing. Like Priti Patel in England, they wanted to create a hostile environment for these people. This is Yonel's family, his father, Lupascu, who has TB, and these are the twins, Mihai and Georgie. This is the aunt who walked back from Transnistria, all the rest of her family dead. at the Porajmos. And these stories I keep hearing about the genocide that was practiced against them by the Nazis. Here I am with Lupascu and Bankuta, who was able to narrate this wonderful story about Santa Perasheva, which I did record, but unfortunately that little computer got stolen, so I don't have it any longer. And these are the young parents who now live with me, Yonel and Diamanta. This is when Yonel was 17, and this is Diamanta cutting back the dead irises, looking like a pre-Raphaelite. And they had written their names for the first time in May of 2010, and now they can write their names beautifully. And this is our association, which is founded for the library, for the restoring of the cemetery, and to help these families. And this is our library school, which we held outdoors in the beginning because of Lupascu's TB. And we were also seeing that their homes got windows because that's cheaper than hospitals and drugs against TB. And here's Bankuta, and here again, and they're all by the statue tomb of Southwood Smith, who was preaching the importance of fresh air and sunlight in the homes of Victorian slums. And here they're learning how to do the lettering, and here they have a copy, facsimile of Brunetta Latina's Le Livre du Trésor from St. Petersburg. And yeah, Mihai is copying out the plaque on the wall in the outside and completing it of Elizabeth Browning's poetry about the tombs of children in Santa Croce and their mothers. And schools in Romania, in Bucharest, in the 19th century, were held in graveyards. So we got it right. And but for a long time, the women didn't join us. And finally, the men explained that the women wouldn't accept being in the same room with men not their husbands. The women insist on chastity. They're more likely to send their boys off to be prostitutes than to prostitute themselves. And I can remember people complaining about a young woman pretending to be an old woman begging at the Duomo, and they were saying, but she's got young feet. And I said, well, that's better than prostituting yourself. And here we see Marian, who is Nikolai Ferraru's daughter, and the lovely long braids, and she is writing out the alphabet and the Lord's Prayer. And then Deuter is looking at a children's Dante, and she's saying, che bello. And here, her two children, Esmeralda and Ferdinando, Esmeralda came to my computer where I was transcribing Brunetto Latino, writing on Aristotle's Ethics, on justice, which she read in her third language at 10 years old perfectly. And the two young students behind them are from New York University. I believe that it is possible to bring the bottom up to the top by this solidarity, the sharing of cultures. And this is Marion, who is helping me prepare the library schools. People give us encyclopedias and children's books and school books and art books, and we send these to Romania to be with the families to whom we give stipends to the mothers to look after the library schools and to stay with their babies instead of coming here to beg and annoying people. And this is Arika. Her husband was in prison and she had this newborn. And she was being looked after by social assistants. And she would come and I made her the marsupio and she would garden for me. And she was absolutely lovely. And then this little baby here, she's dying of a brain tumor. It's inoperable. And she would smile at her mother, and her mother would smile at her. She was blind. You couldn't see the smiles, but she could feel the love. Social assistants wanted to take her from her mother. Her mother came to me for help, and we managed to get her to Spain. Her mother explaining she wanted this baby to die with love in her arms. She knew she was dying. She also knew this was a genetic disease and she had decided not to have any more children, but she wanted to love this one. And then Frances Trollope, who's buried here, she wrote the first anti-slavery novel, Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. And Auguste Evreux, who travelled with her, and she had witnessed the cruelty towards slave children, which they put into their novel. Here you see reality becoming literature. And Richard Hildreth did the same. He's buried here, and he wrote the second anti-slavery novel. Excuse me for my spelling error. And here you see the last daughter being seized from her mother by the slave dealer, which is still happening today with Roma children. Uh, and here we have Harriet Beecher Stowe, who copies both Trollope and Hildreth for Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1852 and immediately translated into Romanian 1853, and this frees the Roma slaves. So our cemetery has come full circle, and the stories about Eliza escaping across the ice with her baby, the last daughter in Richard Hildreth, and the slave boy here are still being carried out against Roma families here in Florence. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, she wrote Aurora Leigh, which is a wonderful 9-book epic using Greek, Latin, Hebrew. It's splendid. And its second heroine is Roma, is Marian Earl, who looks like herself with ringlets and so forth. And by the way, that slave shackle broken here is designed on her tomb by Frederick Lord Leighton to celebrate her writing against slavery, not only Aurora Leigh about the unwed mother, but also the runaway slave at Pilgrim's Point, the mother who kills the child who's the product of the rape by her white master. And Theodore Parker, who preached with a loaded gun at the pulpit in Boston, the abolitionist, he is buried here. And Frederick Douglass commissioned this new tomb for him by William Wetmore Story, about whom Henry James wrote. And here is Frederick Douglass and his diary, in which he writes about visiting this cemetery, 11th of May, 1887. And so Daniel created this plaque to celebrate that with the Lord Leighton lily, which is Florence's iris on it. And then this is the tomb of Nadezhda. She was a black Nubian slave brought here at 15 with the expedition of Champollion and Rossellini. Rossellini's uncle brought her freedom to Nubia and Egypt. And then this is Joan Cantacuzene, who is descended from the emperors of Byzantium and who possessed Roma slaves like Daniel's ancestors. And then Thomas Southwood Smith, who was preaching about the need for hygiene and fresh air. Ages shall honour in their hearts enshrine thee, Southwood Smith, physician of mankind, bringer of air, light, health into the home. Sorry about the ambulance going to Santa Maria Nuova Hospital, of the happier poor of years to come, by Leigh Hunt. And we find many diseases amongst the Roma who can't afford medical care, leukemia and TB, diabetes, and so forth. The poverty is extreme, and I find it scandalous. The Roma were slaves of the nobles and monasteries from the Middle Ages until the 19th century. And this is a chatra or slave village, and it's exactly like Osmanoro in Florence up to 2010. And my sense is that we need to understand how to undo the trauma of cultural genocide, how to heal it, which is what we try to do in our project of tombs to cradles, graves to cradles. This is when I went to speak to the European Union in 2011. And then UNESCO asked us to give me for me to give them examples of restoration work in Florence. So this is Daniel with Alberto Casciani, And they have restored this with TNR, Italy's top research body, with laser. And here Daniel has made the facsimile of Dante's Libro del Chiodo with Enrico Giannini, whose ancestors have been bookbinders in Florence for centuries. And then one of my, she is the daughter, Hebe, of my I was tutor to her mother as ordinand, who had 5 daughters and was training to be a Methodist minister with the Anglicans. And he became to teach the Roma how to chisel on marble, which we've already seen with the plaque, to Frederick Douglass. And this is Marianne, Nicolai's daughter. And then here they're putting gold letters onto one of the tombs. And then there was this fearsome row in 2013. 2 Roma women, not having access to a roof or water, washed their hair and their clothes in this beautiful Della Robbia fountain, which actually was created for the public, for public use. But the journalists said, "Oh, how shocking. They should never be allowed near such a beautiful Della Robbia work of art." But that was what it was created to do. And this is why we find that the sort of knee-jerk reaction is they are to be denied access to water, and then you complain about the dirt. They cannot have electricity or rubbish removal or education or healthcare. And rubbish removal, I saw rats that were huge in Osmanoro leaping about because the rubbish was not being removed. And we find Italy has a very high ratio of Roma children in care and a very low ratio of Roma in the general population. And this was the European Roma Rights Committee and also J.K. Rowling's Lumos Association. And then in the winter of 2014, a German woman persuaded Diamanta, whose children were all safely in Constanza by the Black Sea. Instead, she gave her €500 to get passports for all of them, to bring them to Florence, promising them a villa and work contracts for the parents and schooling for the children. When the children arrived, they were beautifully clean and happy. And she put them in her lover's council house, and the neighbors complained. Then she put them in this abandoned house near Fiesole in Fiesole. And then the police came and said this is illegal. So then she put them in her lover's van, this Renault. And then this is in the coldest days of winter. They arrived in July and they were taken in December, because she wrote a letter to the judges saying the parents are maltreating the children. They are dirty. She was insisting on the children being dirty in order to take photographs, to sell the photographs. And she wrote the letter saying that the parents were keeping the children in filth. She would bring the older girl to the library and then bring her back, she said, to the library, but she would bring her back with lice. And one of the children was actually, the mother took the child to the hospital because they needed care from the filth. The police came and took the other 3 children from the father's arms, and then 2 days later took the baby from the hospital bed, with the grandmother screaming and the mother screaming and so forth, and threatening them all with prison. And she had already taken their passports away so they couldn't escape. And in the UN rights of the child, it's so important that the child had the right papers so that the child is safe, and the right to acquire his nationality, and the right to know and be cared for by his or her parents. We have not been, the parents have only been allowed to see these children twice in 8 years. The mother's only been allowed 3 telephone calls to the oldest child, once with the second oldest child with her. And all of the laws of the Italian constitution, the European laws about the family, and the UN rights of the child are being violated. But we managed to get all the way up to the Supreme Court in Rome, and they said the children deserved to know their story. But they told the tribunal in Florence to sort it out, and the tribunal videoed the children saying they didn't want to return to their parents because they'd been abandoned by them, because they didn't know their parents had been fighting all the way up through the courts to have them be restored to them. So the whole thing is based on the false letter. Um, they're deeply religious, and their favorite saint is Saint Santa Parasheva. She was the daughter of a rich family, very beautiful, and she stole the family food to give to the poor. And they bring her body out in the coffin every year, and everyone goes on pilgrimage if they can to touch the coffin. Or if they can't and they're still here in Florence, they come to watch this on my computer, and they touch the computer screen, believing that that will keep them healthy for the entire year. And their faith is so profound and so real, much more real than mine. But realizing the horror of first the slavery and then the porajmos, the Holocaust, where so many of them died of starvation, and that they felt such guilt because they hadn't had a coffin, a grave, the banquet which they always do every year at the grave of their loved ones, the candle, the bread and the wine and the priest. So we did it here in this cemetery, and I asked the Romanian Orthodox priest, Peter Coleman, to come, and they prepared the banquet, and here they are participating in it. And I found that after this, they didn't hate themselves so much. They had this burden of guilt about what had happened and the survivor guilt and so forth. And this is our school, and this is Sophia Nikolai's wife. This is Diamanta, Yonel, and Nikolai. And here are Yonel and Diamanta. The cradle is in the corner. And Karen Graffio's photographs in our library. And here, because they're learning to read and write, and Diamanta is half blind, and here she's spelling out her children's names. And they've got a birthday cake for the son that they don't have any longer with them. And here they are digging graves in the cemetery because they are my grave diggers. And the social assistance forces Diamanta, when she goes to see her children, the 2 times she did, to wear trousers. And Roma women do not wear trousers. They will not be transvestite. They wear these beautiful skirts. And poor Diamanta feels so ill at ease when she has to dress the way Gaggi forced her. So the cemetery is full of stories, its library of books of the past and the present, and hopefully for a better future. And here I have Diamanta telling stories, the stories she could have shared with her children. And they're stories straight out of Shakespeare and Apuleius. They're wonderful stories about the king with the 3 daughters and so forth. And this is the story of the court hearings. The unsigned calumniating letter is the basis of all of this cruelty to the children. And the oldest girl now says she doesn't want to go on living. She wishes she'd never been born. And the orphanage where she is, she says, is Kaka. And the boy is angry with the whole world because they believe that their parents have abandoned them, didn't want them, which is absolutely untrue. And then we find that the statements are that this German woman worked very closely with social assistants. And we went through the court hearings, and they went to the Romanian consulate to declare paternity, which Ionel couldn't do at 17 because he was still a minor. And then I was told by one of the judges that the German lady was constantly speaking against me and against them. So our side of the story has never been heard by them. And at the adoption hearing, I brought the grandmothers, Patrika and Dinaka, and they were sleeping in my room with me and smoking in the night. Yonel and Diamanta no longer smoke. They've become Pentecostal, and it was a problem, but they never drank and they never took drugs. And they live with me in the English cemetery. We asked for the DNA because they were saying, accusing the parents of trafficking children that were not their own when they were. It was the other side. It was trafficking the children. And then the court declared that the children are abandoned by their parents. It was all a travesty. We managed to get Yonel's paternity recognized by the Romanian consulate, and only at the very last minute were we able to register that at the adoption hearing, but it was disregarded. And then we were able to get the DNA of the mother to check whether she was the mother of the children, but they didn't do the fathers. And then they finally did do Yonel's and realized that he is biologically the father, but they were still rejecting the parents' right to their children. The two youngest are fostered in a fine family, but the two oldest first were in a family in Florence where the mother said, "Don't go near the gypsies, they drink your blood," which is sort of the blood libel, which was absolutely terrifying to the young girl who did start to menstruate at that point and just went into a panic. And then they were taken because Diamanta did unofficially know where they were. They were playing in a park, and she brought to them all of the letters that they'd been given to social assistants, that social assistants hadn't given to the children. And the judges asked the oldest girl, um, what was the situation like in this adopting family? And she said, "I don't want my finta mother, my pretend mother. I want my real one." So they took them out of Tuscany to far away as possible so the parents could never find them. And at least Diamanta was able to gain legal residency. But the adoptability was declared. We appealed. They married legally in Costanza. They had one visit in 2017. This had happened originally in 2014. The appeal is negated, and we were actually fined a huge sum for resisting the court. And then Diamanta was even condemned to prison for resisting her children being taken from her, because this happened several times. We took the case to the Supreme Court in Rome, and they suggested that the children needed to know their story. But the decision was made by Florence, no, the children shouldn't know their story because then they will be less adoptable. But we don't think they're likely to be adopted in the state that they're in. So we have this history of Osmanora, the birth of the second child. 9 days later, the camp is bulldozed and the family homeless. And then the Hospital of the Innocents, they're outdoors. They've just got a roof over their heads, but no wall for 40 Roma for 8 years. And then the third and fourth children, all of her children are born by cesarean section, always taken to their grandmothers in Constanza. And then the German lady interferes and they are brought here. And they are falsely promised a villa, schooling, and work contracts, and so forth. And we have been saying in any proceedings pursuant to the children being taken, all interested parties should be given an opportunity to participate in the proceedings and make their views known. We have not been allowed that. So I've written a 70-page book called Trafficked Roma Children, and I've translated it into Italian as well. And today, the parents posted to the children, we know that the book letters will be thrown away and not allowed to reach the children, but where they tell the story of what happened. And then we have the story of Sarah Parker Raymond. She came and studied medicine here in Florence at Santa Maria Nuova Hospital and became the first official woman MD. And she's an African American abolitionist. She arrived here with a letter from Giuseppe Mazzini. And we are now creating a lapide, a plaque, done by Daniel Dumitrescu, who'd already done the one for Frederick Douglass. And we're going to offer this to Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. Sarah Parker Raymond, abolicionista, afroamericana, studiò la medicina all'ospedale Santa Maria Nuova 1866-1868, because I feel that all of these things really are honouring women like Elizabeth Barrett Browning with the Gonfaloni of Justice of Florence and the laurel wreath and so forth. Honouring women, honouring their work against oppression and so forth. And we are fighting this situation. We find that the parents now love each other deeply. They were very upset with each other at losing the children. They were completely traumatized in the beginning, but they're now splendid. And they've allowed me, by their work here in the cemetery and in the house, cooking, cleaning, and so forth, they've allowed me to write many books during this time. They've lived with me now since 2014 and 2015. And they won the Nicholas Denoni Medal in San Lorenzo Basilica. He was the Swedish doctor, Danish doctor, who came to Florence and was beatified as a medical person and as the major geologist to discover the striae of. And this is the bibliography, and it's quite massive, with all of the bicameral mine material, which I've been discussing in the Academia Bessarion material on the Roma and so forth. And also with the material on truth and reconciliation between Native American tribes and Anglos and so on. And so now that's From Graves to Cradles, number 16. And I am so grateful to you for listening to this. And now we will interrupt the conda, and if we can go into Vista and see all of us, Galleria. And we've got one person in her pajamas, so she doesn't want the video on. And thank you. And it's quite a story. And it deserves being told because they get such a bad press. I mean, they're the scapegoats when the politicians are in trouble. It's so easy to blame the travelers, to blame the tinkers, to blame the gypsies, and so forth, to blame the Jews, to blame the women, to blame the blacks, and so on. But it's absolutely wonderful when we live equally together. It becomes a kind of kingdom of heaven, and I'm so grateful to them. They looked after me so beautifully when I broke my shoulder, and I couldn't even get out of bed. And I would call in the night, "You're Nell," and he would arrive, never grumbling. He did all of the injections and so forth. He had looked after his family when he was from 7 years old to 11 years old, a 6-month-old baby until she was 5, his father with TB, the twins, and other siblings, and he did all the cooking, cleaning, and while his mother was begging in Italy and sending the money home. So to me, these people are admirable. They are criminalized in the eyes of the authority, but I find them the opposite of what we think they are. This extraordinary paradox. Okay, I want to hear from you.
Well, I have a question, Julia.
Yes,
Can you hear me okay?
yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, so a few weeks ago in the New York Times, there was an article about the history of the treatment of the people in Europe. Did you see
Hmm.
that article yet?
No, I didn't. Right.
Okay, I have to find it and send it to you. But
Yes. Hmm.
it was, it's something you probably need to include in your bibliography.
Right. Good. Thank you.
And it was sadly, it was about how the certain countries have used the pretense of tracing the
Oh, right. You
genealogy of
right.
the
The
Roma.
DNA stuff. Yes.
Yeah, so used
Um.
it
Mhm.
to justify imprisoning people who aren't even really Romanian.
Mhm.
I didn't quite get hold of everything they said, but it was clearly directed at the Roma, different
Yes.
types of Roma.
Yes. And there is a serious problem. I mean, this also happens here in amongst the nobility in Florence. If you intermarry too much, there are terrible genetic diseases which happen. And this happens with the Florentines at the top, and it happens with the Roma at the bottom in the villages, the intermarriage, because they don't want to marry into the Gaggi, who to them are so cruel. And this means diseases like the baby I showed with the head tumor, the brain tumor, and also diamantus pigment, retinitis pigmentosa, and which also involves obesity and kidney damage and temper tantrums, which is why she ended up being condemned to prison. Fortunately, I was able to have her under house arrest here. But because she couldn't go to Romania, she couldn't leave the city of Florence for more than a year. And she couldn't get to there to sign the documents. They lost their home and had to get another one. The legal situation for them is very precarious, and they're not likely to get compensation because with the illiteracy, they can't keep records. I've kept very careful records of making sure that everything gets into written form so that we can take this material to Strasbourg. And but you are right. I remember that essay now. Mm. Susan, do you have comments?
Other than it's absolutely amazing what you're doing, almost overwhelmingly so, and grazie and brava. It's
I have loved their friendship because it's so deep and so genuine. It's so reciprocal, and I'm not used to that. It's they've restored my faith in humanity, and to see their faith is so beautiful. It's a paradox that Marx, who was advocating atheism, did speak about the consolation of in the religion. It's the opiate of the masses, the consolation of the weak. But it is beautiful. It does console. And in my own life, I've gone through cycles of experiencing what I thought was poverty. And then I realized theirs was greater. And what I loved is I once bought a beautiful paisley silk skirt, which I wore at my son's weddings and so forth. And when I went into the convent, of course, I didn't wear secular clothes anymore. And I gave the skirt to my sister-in-law. And when I went into the came out of the convent, she gave it back to me, but I wasn't going back into secular clothes. So I gave it to a Roma woman. And months later, a Roma woman was running towards me in Santa Maria Novella station. And I was saying, as I usually say, I don't give money to Roma. I have no money. And she said, I wanted to thank you for this skirt. And I had not experienced that kind of thankfulness. I given my husband a house, a car, three sons, his PhD, and not a word of thanks. And then to see, the it was that I've loved, and I just find my heart warmed all the time by this living together. Florentines tell me they would never allow Roma in their house.
oh, no.
Uh, it's true they do steal, because they don't have a sense of property. But I also sort of feel that I don't have the right to property myself. It needs to be shared where it's needed. And so I don't get really upset about that, and so forth. It's so on. Laura, can you add something? And I hope we didn't lose too many people with the confusion about
Oh,
the uh,
well,
Zoom.
if um,
I can't lip read you,
I know, but I haven't said anything quite yet. I
Hmm.
wonder if you still want to keep the recording going since the presentation is done.
Hmm.
Do you, yes? Okay. So I looked at the pictures of the places that these people live,
Yes.
and I've heard you talk about this for many years, but this is the first time I was able to organize it sequentially because that's how you
Right.
had presented it, which was very helpful
Hmm.
and, of course, disturbing.
Yes.
Um,
It is scandalous.
but I wanted to say that Wabanaki Truth and Reconciliation, the truth telling of that
Hmm.
Wabanaki Reach, which is I'll just let
Yes.
you know, Susan, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Maine that dealt with the stories of the Native children that had been stolen from their families and sent to those Indian schools in the States. And this process they went through, which ended with a large report and then recently a documentary called Dawnlands, they have a new project now called, oh, something like truth telling, or it's another project going for the stories of more people to be collected. And they even have hired an assistant executive director for that project. They're doing such wonderful work. And I really want to connect you with them, Julia, because
Yes. Hmm.
it's such a
Hmm.
similar situation.
Right.
So I, I won't, I won't go into how it's not similar because I don't want to um, make assumptions,
Well,
but
it is. I mean, we're seeing this pattern of the stolen generation in Canada, in America, in Australia, in Argentina, in Spain, in Ireland. It is global. It's probably happening with the Uyghurs and so forth in China. Um, and I think we, just as Harriet Beecher Stowe and Francis Trollope and Richard Hildreth spoke out against the selling of children away from their families and so on, we need to do this more. And it's
well,
through
I think
storytelling. Mhm.
if it would be okay with you, I'd like to share this video once you've put it back in, in a recorded format. I'd like to share it with them.
Yes. Hmm.
Would that be okay?
Yes. Hmm.
Okay. No, I think seeing that article, the little that
Opening.
I read of it,
Hmm.
seeing
Okay, now I'm back again.
the
Yes, that.
extent
Hmm.
and the history of the prejudice against the Roma and the extreme attempts at cultural genocide
Yes. Hmm.
across the board, across many countries, across
Hmm.
many centuries. It made everything you're telling me, not that I didn't believe you before, but it put it in context that
Hmm.
what you're talking about is the manifestation of a much older, much more deeply rooted problem.
Hmm.
And it it helped me understand just what you're up against trying to protect them.
Hmm. Hmm. They do have to find patterns which are not desirable, um, because there aren't any other loopholes. Begging, stealing, separating themselves from their children, whom they love very much, for their survival, and which is, it is the paradox. I now, with Brexit, I'm no longer a European citizen. They are European citizens, and they do have the right to medical care and education and work. But this is the system figures out how to deny it to them, to continue the poverty. And
And
it's
goes to great lengths. It
mhm.
boggles my mind the lengths to which these institutions have gone
Yes.
for
I
the
find the
to
most
account.
shocking is the case with the four children,
Yes.
that how they dared to continue believing in that false letter for 8 years. And
Well, they can't really believe
they
it. You know, they
continued,
don't. They
they,
don't really believe it. They're just using it as an excuse.
hmm hmm it, that's been troubling me enormously. I felt very good about what's happened with most of the families we've worked with, that we've been able to see real improvement in their situations. I've had to say, no, I can't do medical expenses. They're too much for me because I have to go private. They don't have state. Uh, they're more like you would have to be in America if you're ill and you don't have the money, you die. Um, and this is why they're dying like flies. But we've been insisting on education, on at least windows in their houses and so forth.
And the
Um,
library schools.
mhm.
How did the library schools get
They're
started?
wonderful. We get given 10,000 a year, and we work with 11 families, 10 mothers and one widow, and who all stay with the children. And the widow is his story was really tragic because he was very much in love with. There were two Roma in the orphanages, and they didn't have their language because the orphanages didn't allow Romani, and but they married each other. They managed to get smuggle themselves into school. They became literate, but now they no longer completely belong to their own people. But he's then she was wanting to go to nursing school, and he didn't have the money to pay for it, and he came here, and I was at the point of offering him help to do the library school in Romania. But that very day, she went in front of a train and killed herself. So he went back to look after the two children, and he's now in charge of the library schools. And so he gets helped in this project. And he's Diamanta's half brother. And the, it has really worked, that project, because it means that there are 10 mothers less begging on the streets of Florence, and
But
they are
did
with
you
their children.
did you initiate that project?
They did. We talked it through. We don't do anything unless it comes from them.
Well, that's
You
great.
know, what I ask is, what do you need to come out of this poverty? What would work?
Yeah,
And then we
that's
design it
very
together.
important. Yeah.
Yes, we have to be equal as we do it. And in a way, I have to be poor to do it. I have to be able to say, look, I can't manage more than this because I don't have it. And so and it is amazing how it works out because there's everything arrives, clothes arrive, people give us clothes, people give us books. We have a tremendous overflow of books. I don't buy books for the library, they arrive from all over the world. People give us food and so forth. It's a kind of economy of giving. It's not an economy of love, of money. It's of love instead. And I just, well, I just find that this works and the other system doesn't. Um, we've had the Swiss have tried to plant trees in the cemetery. Now it's 5 times, and the trees have always died because they think they can plant them in May and so on and so forth. And I asked Florentine Noble, who has a beautiful garden, and he sent over 10 cypresses which the Roma planted, and these will not die, and they're planted at the right time. and we asked for small ones so they would be more robust and would grow better. Uh, because we're all of us are so close to the soil, to the place. We understand how to the problems. And what we found too is that the whole project is therapeutic for the people who bury their relatives here. Um, they know what we're doing and they feel good about it. That even when they are buried here, that act is actually helping other people into the future. So their death isn't meaningless any longer. Um, and so I'm just fortunate that we've got a portion of land, and it's amazing that it's here in Florence, that we've figured out how to make it work. Because before the place was going into debt, it was just crawling with drug addicts and syringes and black masses, and it was really evil. And then we were able to turn it into a place of great beauty when all the evil stopped. And but it's not the way one would do things academically or institutionally. It's the opposite. Anne, can you say something? Because you're part of this. We're all
Yes,
going to
I
be
know.
buried here.
I know. I try to follow it, but my computer tonight goes on and off the whole time.
I'm
And so
sorry. Yes.
I get part of the program and then it goes off in the middle of a sentence. But
Okay, you'll
no,
be able to to listen to the recording. I'll have that.
yes. Well, I've gotten some, and it's very interesting because there were many things I didn't know. I mean, I knew about, but I didn't know the background. And so, anyway, I'm very happy, and when I can help, I do. I think
Yes.
I have something also to bring over a sweatshirt in these days. Talking about clothes.
Yes. No, Anne is, she's been absolutely wonderful with the materials and so forth, and encouraging
Well,
the
we do what
sewing
we can.
projects and
Well, we do what we can, and we could do more if I had more fantasy, maybe. Well, we'll keep it up. We'll keep getting ideas of things to do.
yes, yes. And what I think has been good about this, I've been able to share the book with Roma professors in Texas, in England, in Italy, and so forth. So I think what we've been able to do is to document what can be done positively in terms of what I say to the Roma when they come is don't lose your culture, have both cultures, and you'll be the richer for it. Whereas what social assistance has tried to do is to prohibit the children their language, their stories, their skills, and to force Diamanta into wearing black trousers because all Italian women wear black trousers now. They didn't back in the 60s. They wore beautiful skirts.
See,
Yes, and that side is quite extraordinary. This forcing people to conform to what is not beautiful. Um, with it's it's troubling at any rate. So um, probably we need to close, or there are more comments or
I want to
suggestions.
thank you for doing this, Julia. I mean,
Thank you for being here,
thank
and
you for all the work over all the years, but thank you for also summing it up for us.
and it's
yes.
thanks to Laura we've been able to figure out how to do Zoom. Right. Thank you.
Well, we'll all participate in some way when we can, how we can.
We do.
Well,
And
And
it's
one of these days, I'm going to get to Florence.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
frustrated that I couldn't come when I wanted to come.
yes.
we'll have a
Right.
meeting.
Yeah,
Mm,
it'd be great to meet you, Anne.
yes, yes. Right. Thank you then.
Thank you,
Thank
Julia.
And
you.
good
So
night.
much.
Okay. Right.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye. Ciao, ciao.
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 Ciao.